Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining. My name is Elena Anamrani, and I'm a program coordinator at CF Leads. And we're pleased to be presenting this webinar with Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo and the Buffalo Niagara Partnership. We have a wonderful program for you today about the impacts of local level partnerships on economic mobility with some excellent speakers. And before we get started, we just have a few housekeeping items. So because this is a webinar, you can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to join us by phone using the number on the screen. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and we will be posting it to our website. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Leonard Brock, Vice President for Learning and Impact at CF Leads.
Greetings and welcome to the first of an ongoing webinar series focused on economic mobility. As stated, my name is Leonard Brock. I am the Vice President for Learning and Impact at CF Leads and will serve as today's moderator. Today's webinar will feature a pilot project which concluded in 2022. For more detailed information pertaining to the pilot project, please read the Advancing Economic Mobility in Our Communities report, which you can find in the chat. The Economic Mobility Action Network was a 2-year pilot project led by CF Leads. It engaged 6 community foundations from across the country in making progress together on advancing economic mobility using a racial equity lens in the communities they serve. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation provided primary funding for the project with additional support from the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. The 6 community foundations that participated in the network included the Chicago Community Trust, Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, who we are joined with today, Foundation for Louisiana, Greater Cincinnati Foundation, San Francisco Foundation, and Southwest Initiative Foundation. Foundations were selected based on a number of factors, including existing economic mobility work, commitment to racial equity, and geography. The chosen community foundations formed teams comprised of the CEO, senior staff, board members, and community partners to participate in the network. Together, these foundations serve a wide range of communities and face diverse challenges in promoting economic mobility and racial equity. As the project began, they were in varying stages of building their capacity and resources for engaging residents, businesses, and public agencies and working toward positive outcomes. CF Leads, together with Community Science and the Network Steering Committee, developed the theory of change for the network process and a framework for measuring progress across the projects, partnerships, communication efforts, and related initiatives the foundations pursued during the 2-year cohort. I am happy to share space with the team from Buffalo to learn more about their work and updates since the conclusion of the pilot project. So without further ado, I would like to introduce members of the team. Today, we have joining us Betsy Constantine, President and CEO for Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, Dottie Gallagher, President and CEO, Buffalo Niagara Partnership, Felicia Beard, Associate Vice President, Racial Equity Initiatives for the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, and Maria White, Chief Community Impact Officer, Chief of Staff for the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, and also formerly the Deputy County Executive for Erie County. Welcome all. Let's start with learning more about the wonderful work taking place in Buffalo. So at this time, I will turn it over to you, Betsy.
Thank you, Leonard. And it is my pleasure to kick us off here in sharing a little bit about Buffalo's story. Thank you for the great introduction and for this opportunity. And as you mentioned, Maria is actually wearing two hats here in this conversation. She is now staff of the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, but when she participated in this tremendous experience of the Economic Mobility Network, she was actually there as a member of the county executive's team as a deputy county executive. So you're going to hear from her in a couple of perspectives. So I'll begin by giving you just a brief overview of the Community Foundation. Felicia, who is our Associate Vice President for Racial Equity Initiatives, will talk to you at a high level about the framework for our racial equity work through the Racial Equity Roundtable. Dottie will then talk about how we have aligned with some efforts from the partnership, specifically Employ Buffalo Niagara and the Benefits Cliff Calculator. And then she'll turn it over to Maria, who will talk about how we are extending this work through youth. And so we're glad to be here. Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, we are one of the original 15 established in 1919, and we're relatively sleepy for the first 85 or so years until our very brave board at the time decided that it was going to, like many of you on the call today, begin to focus its efforts toward impact. And since that time, the foundation, which is about 15 years, the foundation has grown from 150 million in assets to well over 800 million, staff of about 15 to 40. But much more importantly, we have created cross-sector collaborations that are focused on long-term change and have seen change in our community. And so we do that. One of the ways we've done that is by focusing on 4 community goals that now are on the screen here. They are achieving racial and ethnic equity, promoting economic mobility through educational achievement, workforce readiness, and access to family-sustaining jobs for residents living in low-income households. In fact, that language actually was revised and focused after we went through this economic mobility process to really put a fine point on what we're trying to achieve. And then we live on the Great Lakes, 20% of the world's fresh water. So we are focused on climate resilience in our community and promoting a vibrancy through architecture, arts, and culture. So with that, I'll turn it over to Felicia to talk about the Racial Equity Roundtable.
Thank you, Betsy. And thank you to Leonard for this opportunity to present on the work of the Roundtable. And of course, at a very high level, because we want to hear from Dottie and Maria, who will go more specific into several other strategies. So the Greater Buffalo Racial Equity Roundtable was convened by the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo in 2015. It was convened as an unprecedented cross-sector public-private collaborative. And when it was convened, we intentionally selected 30 leaders from 4 particular groups. One is faith institutions, businesses, nonprofits, and public institutions to co-create solutions that will work to ensure that Buffalo has a shared future where racial equity will create prosperity and opportunity for everyone in our region. Today, I am happy to announce that we are working with over 350 partners, which includes lived experience consultants and community-based organizations on a 10-point agenda, which you see in front of you. And the overarching goal of this particular agenda is achieving an expanded and inclusive economy. The 10 strategies are broken down into 2 specific categories. The green circles that you see on top are focused on creating conditions for change. And what that really means is growing our community's capacity to even understand racial equity. It's planting that learning seed, which has really helped us be able to move the work forward to advance racial equity. The blue circles that you see on the bottom are the specific systems for which the Racial Equity Roundtable members identified as opportunities to advance racial equity. The other thing that I'll note about this particular circle diagram that you see in front of us is that because I'm doing a high level overview, the bolded areas represent the actual strategies that we're working on in our community, but the goals are underneath. If you want to know any more specifics about any of these activities that we're doing, we do have a website, racialequitybuffalo.org, that you can visit that has up-to-date information as to where the strategies are. I mean, you can also call me if you like, and I can walk through the strategies with you. But before I turn it over to Maria and Dottie to go more specifically into our youth employment work, the Employ Buffalo Niagara work, and the work that the Buffalo Niagara Partnership is doing with the Benefits Cliff Calculator, I do want to really stress back in the green section, the racial equity impact analysis training, which we have used in our community since 2016 to help us make the economic case for racial equity that we've been doing. And what that means is that we've been working with businesses, corporations, government on helping our leaders to insert a racial equity lens into their decision-making practices. And that goes anywhere from marketing to policies, practices, benefits, or anything to make sure that their workplaces are inclusive as well as their workplace practices. So with that, I will turn it over to Dottie to tell you about the wonderful work at the partnership.
It's only been 3 years. You figure I could turn my mute button off. And thanks, Felicia. I appreciate the introduction, and hello to everyone on the call. Thank you for making time for us today. For those of you who may not know what the Buffalo Niagara Partnership is or does, we are the regional chamber of commerce in our community, and you all have them in your community as well. In Buffalo, we suffer from a couple of really big challenges. One is we have a very high rate of poverty in our community. We are segregated by design and have been since the beginning of time, and we don't have people knocking down the doors to move here. So when you look at our community and how are we going to lift the community, it really became for all of us not only a moral imperative to address this issue, but really an economic imperative to address the issue. So if you look at the circle chart that Betsy has in front of you, the Buffalo Niagara Partnership in the green, we are there under the Diversity Inclusion Initiative, which is really started with teaching employers and doing sort of a co-op on best practices this is going back 6 or 7 years ago. And in 2020, after George Floyd was murdered, we launched a assessment of our business community about diversity and inclusion practices, which was informed by studies that we saw in Philadelphia and in Cleveland, and repeated that again in 2022. That's our plan every 2 years to see, are we moving in terms of intentionality, our practices in creating inclusive workplace culture. So that's where we are in the green bubble. The Business Leaders Task Force that you see there, I'm also very involved in as a member, but those are 12 or 13 or 20 or so, I don't remember the exact number now, of major employers in the region who have committed initially to a procurement initiative. And then you see Employ Buffalo Niagara, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today, which is our coalition building around how do we make the work, reduce the barriers for access to jobs in our community? How do we make the workforce system work better for employers and for individuals trying to access it, given the conditions that we have here and needing everybody who can participate in our economy to have the opportunity and ability to do so. So I guess you can move on to the next slide here. So we're going to talk about the Benefits Cliff Calculator, which we didn't build ourselves. It was built by the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, and I'll talk a little bit about how that relationship came together. But before I do that, I'm going to take you in the Wayback Machine to at the time when the Racial Equity Roundtable, this is an actual slide with our old logo from 2015, when Cotil Dedecker, Betsy's predecessor, and I began this conversation around these two major issues. And there were, we made a pledge at that very moment of saying, we aren't going to do these things in parallel. We're going to do them in an integrated way so that they are completely complementary to the work. And so I actually drew this on the back of a napkin about what is the Racial Equity Roundtable. Again, these are early days before we had all the 10 little circles, like when we were first starting out. and what was before it was Employ Buffalo Niagara, something we call the Regional Workforce Development Coalition. And I'll say this: I was a member of the Racial Equity Roundtable at its initiation, and Clotilde was a member of the Regional Workforce Development Coalition. So that's sort of job number one, right? We're not starting from scratch. We've built a relationship, and we are understanding what our organizations are trying to accomplish in the community. But what you see in this Venn diagram is the overlap between the work that the Racial Equity Roundtable wanted to address and what the Regional Workforce Development Coalition needed to address, where there was complete overlap. Issues that impact the under and unemployed, which is really what the benefits cliff calculator is all about, the public education for youth of color, and supports for new entrants to the workforce. Meanwhile, on our side of the house, we were really focused on training and education programs, demand forecasting for in-demand jobs, and getting employers to sort of operate differently to create a supply pipeline for talent. In the Racial Equity Roundtable side of this, criminal justice and safety and quality of life in neighborhoods were two of the areas that we weren't going to be addressing at all through the Regional Workforce Development Coalition, which became Employ Buffalo Niagara. So that led, so this is 2015. So fast forward to where we are now. We have branded our efforts Employ Buffalo Niagara, and is much more than just a coalition. Betsy, you can go to the next slide. And what came out of the coalition's early work was this issue of people not taking advantage of opportunities, not taking promotions. And the coalition's magic was that in the coalition were workforce intermediaries, training providers, higher ed, and employers, and majority employers. And these conversations would happen about, from people's perspectives, about what was really going on. Why couldn't employers find the people that they wanted, the jobs that were available, and what were the barriers that were getting in the way? And I have to say, there was a tremendous amount of learning that went through this. And one of the things that we learned was employers were under this impression that people were not taking promotions because they were lazy, or they were super happy in their jobs, or they were calling in sick because they didn't really want to come to work. And they had all these assumptions that were just really untrue. And a lot of the workforce intermediary folks were saying, our people never get promotions, and why is that? And so we really began this, let's get underneath the why. And the why was really around the benefits cliff. So I'm sure people on this call understand what it is, but when we start to talk as a coalition about how do we get underneath this so that an employer can actually be part of the solution in all of this to get talented people further up in their organization, what we realized when we would talk to anyone who had any level of expertise is the answer to where is the benefits cliff. The answer is it depends. It depends on how many children you have, what their ages are, how many people are in your household total, how many wage earners are there, what your current income is, which public benefits you're able to take advantage of. So this sort of soup of factors really made it difficult for us to get to employers to say, here are the kinds of employees that you really have to pay extra attention to so that they can, they're calling in sick not because they don't want to come to work, but because if they do, they might lose, for the extra $50 they're going to earn that week, they're going to lose $5,000 in food support for their families. So we were really socializing this conversation, and through our work, and Clotilde and I had been keeping the Federal Reserve Bank of New York informed of the work of the roundtable and the coalition, the workforce coalition, and the Fed from New York said, hey, our colleagues in Atlanta are building a calculator, and you guys want to talk to them. And we're like, oh my God, that's so awesome, because the whole coalition was like, how do we go about solving this problem? So the Federal Reserve Bank, and this is open to any community foundation that's on this call, you can call the Federal Reserve of Atlanta. They may be in your community already. A lot of them, the deployments, at last I checked, were about 15 communities had this deployment of the calculator. And many of them are done by LISC or other not-for-profits. We were the first, and I think maybe still the only calculator implementation that was driven by the private sector through the chamber. So this is a snapshot. You can go on to the partnership.org and play with this yourself and look at it. But what is unique and interesting about this is that it really takes into account the wages that are paid in our region. So actually, Betsy, don't advance yet. Go back, keep going back, go back, yeah. No, sorry, one more forward. So all of the data that's in here is labor market data and real salaries that are being paid. So if you go into the calculator as an individual or as someone serving this population, you will put in the state that you're in, the county. We have the information built out for Erie and Niagara County, which is our DMA type. In this particular example, the pop-up says 1 adult with 2 children, but there are various other iterations in there. The age of the first child, in this case, the age of the second child. And then under public assistance, there is a checkbox to which benefits you're able to take advantage of. And then what is your broad occupation group? You may be unemployed, you may be in a minimum wage job, and or you may want to be a particular thing, a massage therapist, a nurse, whatever. And you can put that in and then put in how much training do you think that will take. If you click, and it's got a few other things that a person, again, or an individual helping a person would fill out. Betsy, you can go to the next slide. What that will pop up is a series of graphs, and if I'm being perfectly honest, the calculator is a little bit wonky. Okay, so this would be really difficult for someone in the community to navigate on their own. But through people who are supporting counselors, career counselors, and all of those folks that are helping these people figure this out, it is very clear. So what do you see? What are you looking at here? In this particular case, the calculator was run on a series of dynamics. That yellow line is if that person doesn't change their career path, wherever that is. It looks like here they are in a minimum wage or a below minimum wage job. Their total income is not above, in this case, $15,000, if I'm reading this graph correctly. And if they do nothing and they stay where they are over the course of their lifetime, their income will actually go down further. Why? Because their children will age out of those supports, so that is less income to the family. The red bar is if that person makes a decision to take a career. In this case, let's say it was a nursing career. And again, they're all in here, but this job, at the peak of this job, a person would peak in 2046 and this of making nearly $60,000 a year. But what you're looking at, and this is where the benefits story is really told, is the person who made this decision, the screen we're looking at now, that they are going to make a decision in 2022 that they're going to enter training and go for a new job. It won't be until 2026 until they have the same income in their family as they have today. So when you think about this as a mom with 2 young children or a single dad with 2 young children, that's a really hard decision to make. I'm going to work a whole lot harder and I'm not going to get any further ahead because I'm going to lose support. So if people make that decision, if they opt out of what I call crossing the bridge to prosperity at that moment, their life is not going to get any better. But if they are able to, with enough supports, go ahead and make the leap over the course of their lifetimes, their lifetime earnings will be significantly higher. I ran a calculation of a single mom with 2 kids who were young, minimum wage job to a massage therapist, which was not a job that really gets you, a huge salary. But over the course of that person's lifetime, their net disposable income would be more than $200,000, which, if you think about it, is the cost of in Buffalo anyway, a cost of a house. So the calculator also shows, Betsy, you can go to the next slide, when you will lose that public assistance and what type of public assistance is lost at what point based on the conditions you put in there. So on the left is what you're getting, and then the second side is, okay, if I go ahead and I choose this new position in transportation, storage, or distribution management, that's when I'm going to lose these supports. So for example, here, the person who is getting a tremendous amount of housing support in 2022, that little purple bar, they lose that almost immediately when they've moved into that next chosen career path. So this defines both the problem. I would say we don't have pictures of this next, of the other calculator slide, but we rolled this out, and it is very difficult to navigate for individuals, and employers were having a hard time figuring out how to use it, but they wanted to use it. So there's another version specifically for employers that's really an employee by employee basis. I have an employee who's making this, they're getting these supports, and if I give them a promotion or a bonus of $1,500, are they going to be better or worse off economically if I make that decision? So go to the next slide, Betsy. So our initial rollout, which has been going on for about 18 months now, we've gotten some real interesting feedback, and we're now moving into what a real policy advocacy piece. We've sort of, I'm going to say, warmed up and made the ground fertile with employers so that we think they have a better working understanding and challenging their assumptions. But now we really got to get down to brass tacks, which is, this is a problem that employers alone cannot solve without a way for government to operate differently in the way that people lose these supports when they're really trying to advance themselves. We aren't going to get out of this hole. And by the way, this is not a Buffalo problem. This problem exists throughout the country to varying degrees. But again, Buffalo is a great, or bad, I should say, it's not great, but we are a wonderful test case in the fact that our wages are generally lower here, and we do have a population that is much more poor. And so if you're in a market like a Chicago or something else, you might be able to make a whole lot more money a whole lot faster than you can in Buffalo. So it just exacerbates the problem. So this is a cover of a brochure that we have put together to start to do some advocacy work in Albany, which is our state capital. And this one we felt really does perfectly encapsulate the message. When more means less, employers are paying people in the workforce, you think an increase in pay would grow that opportunity, when actually they are bringing home much less. So it's such a counterintuitive thought, and I will tell you the overwhelming response from employers has been surprised that this exists and this happens. Betsy, you can go to the next slide. So we kind of illustrate this out in a way that makes it really interesting, and we've talked about what employers can do to create change, and we also talked about raising the minimum wage, and to make sure that in certain bands of their employees, that they really need to be aware of how to move people past the benefits cliff by investing them, not to take a job where that is, let's say, just modest increase in pay, but enough to really start to compensate for the real issue here, and also to get them on a career track where it's not about the next job, because people who are at the benefits cliff, the next job isn't going to get them out. It's really, it's the job or two after that job. It's the real career opportunity. So for example, I used nursing as an example earlier. If you're a CNA to an LPN to an RN, you run this calculator in 99% of the cases, depending on, again, all the conditions I mentioned to you, you are not better off becoming an LPN from a CNA. And we've gone to the hospitals and said to them, you're going to have problems recruiting people. You either need to drastically increase this pay or find a different way to support these employees, because if they're going to make a rational financial decision not to participate. So that's my last slide. But I would say to you that this work is really, as what Betsy said, is really about getting underneath the systems and to really help people understand these are not some, raising wages alone does not solve this problem. It solves some problems, but it creates other problems. And if we're not aware of how the system is working or not working for people that need supports, we'll do them a terrible disservice while we're trying to help them. And that's really been the message that we've had. And Maria is going to talk about, I think she's going to talk about a demonstration project that came out of this work directly to really try to mitigate the benefits cliff, to help us really create opportunity for change, permanent change. So Maria, I hope that's a good enough setup and transition, but I think
you.
that's good.
Thank you so much, Dottie, and welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be with you. I'll just start by saying a couple of things. I really do want to acknowledge Leonard and the CF Leads team. What a privilege it was to be part of your pilot project. You know, at no time in American history since the last 100 years are we in as much of a gilded age as we were at the beginning of the 20th century. So the topic of economic mobility could not be more timely. We have a very serious issue with that in this country, and going straight at the issue and leading the way is CF Leads. And I'm grateful to be a participant, and I'm grateful to my colleagues. You would be lucky in your community to have a chamber that is as innovative and as active as Dottie and the team at the Buffalo Niagara Partnership. It is really such a pleasure to count her among the colleagues in this work. So I will comment a little bit on the project Dottie talked about, although that was not most of the content of my discussion. So what Dottie was talking about was a pilot project. During my tenure in county government, I spent 17 years in local government, the last 7 of which I served as the deputy Erie County executive. And in late 2020, as we were preparing the 2021, I beg your pardon, in late 2021, as we were preparing the 2022 county budget, we identified a $10 million opportunity to really meaningfully address poverty in our community. And we chose not to take a spray and pray approach to that $10 million and fund many organizations in our community that were doing phenomenal work in the community to help support people living in poverty, but rather to take a really innovative approach. And what county government decided to do was spend $10 million to help between 100 and 150 families get over the benefits cliff. And we were able to do that in part because we were at the table. We, at the time being local government, was at the table as part of the Employ Buffalo Niagara Coalition, as part of the Racial Equity Roundtable. We were aware of the research that was happening from the Federal Reserve of Atlanta and the Benefits Cliff Calculator. And we were able to fund a $10 million pilot project where we worked with employers that had identified specifically people that they would like to promote, but for the benefits cliff. And so Erie County Department of Social Services used local share dollars. And I will point out how key that is. The fact that those dollars were local made it possible for them to be flexible and not have a lot of federal strings attached to prepare this very innovative project. I'll gladly take some questions about that, but I'm going to pivot now to talk about one of the other circles on the circle diagram. So if you recall that circle diagram from the Racial Equity Roundtable, at about 9 o'clock was something called the Youth Employment Coalition. And the youth employment effort was the last strategy to be added to the Racial Equity Roundtable's work. And the Racial Equity Roundtable determined essentially that there needed to be a very specific strategy for our young people. And we needed 3 things. 1, to focus on young people between the ages of 16 and 24. 2, to focus on those young people that were not enrolled in school. So either because they had dropped out of school or graduated high school and had no post-secondary plans. And 3, those young people that did not have a job. So 16 to 24, not enrolled in school and did not have a job. And the Racial Equity Roundtable engaged a study, the Center for Governmental Research, to help sort of identify, well, what's going on with youth employment in the Buffalo and Erie County region? And 3 things I want to highlight from that study. First is that while our consultant found that there were many organizations, nearly 40, that were working on workforce issues specifically for that youth population, there was no cohesive system. So lots of them working, but not working together. A second conclusion that came out of that report was that many youth faced confusion and barriers and awareness issues about the types of opportunities that might be available to them. And The consultant did a very good job to consult youth and to engage them in a focus group. So they pulled that information directly from the youth. And the third thing that they determined from the youth is that of the youth that were able to participate in some kind of youth employment program, they found it to be life-changing and really to support them in a career trajectory. So from that Center for Governmental Research, recommendations were given to the roundtable. The first was to form a coalition. The second was to embed racial equity as a work of the coalition and in the work of the coalition. And the third was to make sure that that effort was data informed. And the slide that you see in front of you now is sort of the 5 different pillars of the Youth Employment Coalition. And I really want to draw your attention for the time being to the pillar in the middle, which talks about moving from programs to pathways. Youth are accessing a coordinated and clearly articulated system of pathways and supports. And so in order to put together that specific pillar, just earlier this week, in partnership with Dottie and the Buffalo Niagara Partnership and many others, providers, service providers, training service providers in our community, along with local governments and many funders, we were able to launch something called Buffalo Futures. And I am just going to put for you a link to Buffalo Futures in the chat. So I will do that now, and I invite you to take a look at that. So I've pasted it here. Elena, I'm hoping that you can share that, or Rachel. So Buffalo Futures is a online, and it's both a virtual and a physical location to help our young people that are 16 to 24, don't have a job, not enrolled in school, find an actual career pathway. And on the Buffalo Futures website, as Dottie talked about at our press conference earlier this week, there are 37 different career paths on that website, representing more than 300 different jobs. And Buffalo Futures is really intended to help our young people achieve sort of 4 things. 1, a career that is not just a job, but actually a career pathway. 2, a career pathway that is in demand in the local labor market area. 3, a career pathway that will pay a sustaining wage as you move along the pathway. And 4, that has a low barrier to entry. In other words, you don't need a master's degree in order to access the first job in the pathway. So I invite all of you to take a look at that website. I'm also going to put in the chat a YouTube video about Buffalo Futures. Now that we've launched it, it is such a pleasure to share the YouTube video, and you can learn more about Buffalo Futures. And I'll just close by sort of offering you a few reflections on what should you take away kind of from this youth employment work. Really, there are a few takeaways. First is that personal relationships will be the thing that makes the difference for these young people. Just like personal relationships make a difference in the work that all of you do, personal relationships will make a difference for these young people. So in addition to this website, we have in-person success coaches that will help to mentor these young people and give them a warm handoff to either a training provider or to an employer. The second thing that's a takeaway is that this particular program really represents kind of a one-of-a-kind program in the country. While other programs in the country have in-person sites for youth employment, nobody else has the kind of comprehensive website that's called Buffalo Futures, like the one that we have launched. And really, the third takeaway that I invite you to consider is that this is really the special work of what community foundations can do to bridge the sort of unlikely partners that make something like this possible, bridging employers with disconnected youth, with service providers, with local government, right? That's the special sauce that often makes community foundations so critical to success. The second thing that community foundations often play a critical role in really innovating solutions and being able to be agile and flexible and experimental in the types of solutions that might make a difference. and to do those solutions by deploying best practices that we've learned from one another, from around the country, and from the data that we have been able to pull together, so that we can make kind of the meaningful difference in people's lives. And that represents, I think, the special sauce of what our community foundation has been able to add, and what I suspect all of you do every day.
Great, Maria. And I don't know if you, Yolanda had a question in there, which Leonard, you can facilitate if you want. But Yolanda, your question about whether any advocacy have been done to public agencies. I think Dottie shared a brochure that is designed exactly for that. And then Maria talked about the demonstration project that Erie County is funding. One of the objectives of that is to be able to use that data to demonstrate to government that if the cliff is less steep, that you will be able to get people to a point of success, which will be better for everybody, and includes data that will be able to even quantify the difference for government in benefits over time. So Dottie or Maria, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I think that's.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mention it, Betsy, before, but one of the things that the calculator shows is the benefit to the public good when someone, and by that meaning that person's now creating taxes and also the savings of the spend on the public support. So that's exactly right. And I think this is, again, a very complex issue that we just it's going to take time to build understanding. And we've had some legislation here in New York about smoothing the cliff, and it didn't pass this session, but we've supported it, and that's really the next tranche of the work is to move that forward. So,
Betsy, I would only add that that right now there has to be policy change, because we have a system that's working for exactly nobody. It's not working for the employers, right, who can't get people to accept promotions or more hours or the workforce that they need. It's not working for individuals who are continuing to rely on public support, and it's not working for taxpayers who are continuing to fund this dysfunctional hamster wheel. So we did put together that pilot project with an evaluator at our local university at Buffalo, in order to help identify precisely which public policies needed to be changed.
Yeah, and I would just to everyone on this call who's really focused on economic mobility, the benefits cliff, while talked about theoretically, is not really talked a lot about in practice. And to me, it is the thing. It is the barrier that beyond everything else, because the people that we're talking about that are impacted by this are making very rational financial decisions for themselves. And so breaking the bias around that is incredibly important. When the Federal Reserve built the first version of the calculator and put it out there, they used their financial planning model for wealth building. So to me, it's about changing that narrative and to really see, as Maria said, we can turn this into a win-win-win, because right now what we've done is we've not created a safety net, we've created a safety trap. And and government, as you can see in the example I showed, as your children age out, you are really impoverished then, right? So this is where we see these cycles of generational poverty that are, it's a huge contributing factor that we need to get past. And I can't help but think of all the talent that this country is losing for people who are not able to advance in a career beyond just a menial job, that, we're losing in innovation and in just improving our country overall. So it's high stakes. It's a high stakes game.
Thank you all. I do have a few questions, and I see that there are a few questions in the chat as well. But as you were talking, there were three words that came to mind: impressive, responsive, and promising. So thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing. I do have a few questions, and I will try to get at a few questions that I see in the chat. But the very first question I would like to ask, and I want to thank you for walking us through elements of your cross-sector partnership work. There are a number of community foundations, particularly, that's looking to play that convening role. So can you walk me through your best practices and lessons learned from your cross-sector partnership work that would be beneficial for those community foundations that are looking to engage in similar type roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to just start with our recipe. So this on the screen is just, this is some of the, what we call our leadership initiatives and where they are in the stage. And I'll walk you through the recipe, but really what you heard here, I think would be the key takeaways I want you to walk away from. So our typical recipe is we begin with an issue that's ripe for attention. We bring together the key stakeholders who have the authority and the vested interest to make change. We agree that we're not happy with the current situation and that we want to be part of doing something together. We typically bring data to the table so we understand what we're working with, and then we develop a plan to work together. And a couple of, and that's like super simple, like oversimplified. I think a couple of the key things that are really important that I think really show in this conversation. So Dottie and Maria both referenced, and Felicia, that they were already working together through Roundtable and through other efforts and collaboration. So trust was already built. That's a really important piece to any of this. They were already in partnership, and then opportunities also met preparation, right? Or what the old saying goes. So anytime you get into this work, you're going to find that every system is a mess, basically, and that there's a lot of different places you can start. And so when you identify who are the key voices we need at the table, when you present good information and you agree you want to work together, then you're going to need to be flexible and find the opportunities as they align with your key partners. And I think that that's a really important thing not to lose sight of. You also really want to understand, what is it that those key partners, what's important to them, what's in their self-interest, right? So Dottie has to make her members happy, right? And her members need people to fill the jobs. That's the number one thing that was among the things, Dottie, that you hear. I'm imagining that's one of the top things you're hearing. So that's perfect, right? Because we've got the people who we want to be able to move up in the jobs. So that's a perfect alignment. For the government, you want to understand what their key issues are, what their key drivers are for the county. And it might be different in our case for the county and the city sometimes. So that's extremely important. So bringing people together, and at least what we have found, and it's not always the case, because different things can occur at different times, but you really want those tables to be set before I think the ones that have been the most successful is where you at least have momentum and relationships and partnerships already at the table before you say, here's the solution. Where we have found it to be less successful in our community is where we have foundation partners who have said, hey, here's this awesome thing that's going to fix this. Do you all want in? That, at least in our experience, has had less success and traction than when people are at the table at the beginning. Dottie, Maria, Felicia,
Yeah,
have anything?
When we talk about, and it sounds like everything we planned worked swimmingly here. And that's not the case. In fact, I would say with the Regional Workforce Task Force, originally when we started out, we spent 18 months studying best practices in workforce, employer-led workforce efforts, and we landed on what was happening in Houston. And in Houston, it was a four-way partnership between the community college system, the Workforce Investment Board, the Chamber, and United Way. And we tried to bring that to Buffalo, and it was, at any one point in time, we only had two legs to that stool that were very strong, and we just could not replicate it. And even though it had, demonstrated success and great data and metrics, and, it really does come down to people and leaders and who they are. I met this guy once from LA, and he'd done this amazing workforce work in Los Angeles. And LA is, huge. I mean, it's like we're a little old Buffalo, but it's, huge. Anyway, I said to him, how did you pull this off? He's like a chamber guy, like, having this very high profile with and getting a lot of work done with the public workforce system there. And he said, there's no substitute for shoe leather. You just got to show up, even when things drive you crazy. And eventually people stop showing up and you still show up. And then they start asking you to do stuff, and then you do more stuff, and there is no substitute. And I would say my own weakness as a human being is, if I see a problem or I see something I want to get done, what are the 5 things I have to do to make this happen? And I'm gonna strong muscle the way through that list. And in this kind of work, it really comes down to time it takes to build trust and buy-in that, when we're all in such a hurry to get to solution making, you can't get there. What is the PPG says, progress moves at the speed of trust. I think that is really very, very, FSG, I'm sorry, that I think is very true. So what you're seeing where we are now is a result of some success and some failures along the way as we've tried to, iterate this challenge.
And then, Leonard, just to add just one little piece to that, especially looking at the work of the Greater Buffalo Racial Equity Roundtable, because it was an unprecedented cross-sector collaboration, we had many people that were sitting around the table who were working on a very sensitive subject, advancing racial equity in our community, who had to kind of mesh and develop relationships amongst each other. And what the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo was able to do was to hire a consulting team, the Race Matters Institute in particular, and APFI, to come in and really work and spend that time that Dottie mentioned to really build those relationships and be able to create a framework for which we would move for advancing racial equity in our community. And as they did that, they agreed on 3 things. And one was that the work would be data-driven. The second thing would be that we would not repeat anything. We wouldn't reinvent the wheel. We would look at best practices. And then the third thing, which in my opinion is the most important, especially as you're developing these relationships and friendships around the table and even outside, is that we would call people into the work as opposed to calling people out.
Thank you for sharing. Those personal relationships and building trust is absolutely critical and essential, I see. Speaking of which, I have another question as it relates to best practices for working with community members. Can you share a little more about your engagement with community members and how you're able to keep them committed to the table, et cetera?
Absolutely. So as I noted when I was talking about the Roundtable's portfolio of work, we've had lived experience consultants engaged, and we've had community-based organizations as well. And what we found is that we bring the community, you should bring the community in at the beginning. Meaning if you look at yourselves, there's kind of like nothing more insulting than coming in at the end of a process and kind of being just given something, right, without having any input for something that's going to affect you directly. So we bring the community in at the beginning of the process. You don't have the diagram in front of you, but even just to go to Youth Employment Coalition work that Maria spoke about, as well as another initiative that's on our circle diagram, which is our Boys and Young Men of Color initiative. We had the young people from our community that were at the table designing and developing those particular initiatives. The Youth Employment Coalition youth actually created the colors, the name of the organization, the fact that they want to be called young professionals as opposed to youth. Those things are really important, especially if we want them engaged in the strategy and the opportunity that we're presenting to make them better. The other thing that we made sure that we did in terms of engaging community and having the community at the table is we offered incentives and stipends. And so we value people's input, everyone's input. We're sitting at the table being paid. Why shouldn't the community receive compensation for the valuable insight that they are offering us to make sure that the product we're producing is a success? Oh, and the last thing I would just say, which kind of takes all of that into consideration, is that people want to be included and respected. And so keeping those things in mind and also potentially putting yourself in that person's shoes, then that'll help you as you're thinking about designing how to engage community and keep them at the table.
Thank you, thank you. And I know we have a few minutes left, so I have a few questions I want to ask, but we can be here forever if I had to go through all the questions I have because there was such rich information you shared. But I will make reference to something. CF Leads just recently conducted an issues and interest survey of community foundations, and the vast majority of community foundations said they work with government, but they also find that work to be challenging. And you've been able to find the sauce. I know it's building relationships, having pre-existing relationships, actually working, rowing in the same direction. But can you just speak about the lessons learned or best practices or what you can share with the field to keep them encouraged as it relates to their partnership with working with local government if they find it to be challenging?
I think, Maria, do you want to talk about that? And Dottie, I know you were going to have a couple of comments about that too.
Dottie, you go ahead.
Well, listen, in my job, I'm poking at local government regularly. That's part of my day job, the advocacy work that we do. But there's a lot of relationship building, and it can't happen soon enough. This is not what I was going to say, but I think it illustrates sort of, how much time these things take. When my last job, I was the CEO of our tourism bureau, and the first thing I did was reach out to county government, who gave us a big grant, and say, I want every county legislature to give me a tour of their district, so to show me firsthand what I should know. And Maria and the county executive at the time were in a pitch battle, which she won and he lost. That's a different story. But I went to Maria's district, and he had set me up and said, you're not going to like her, and she's tough, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we hit it off, and we had a fantastic experience. I was very transparent about with her and with him about, the whole thing. And that really sowed the seeds of openness. And tell me what you want me to know, and I'll tell you what I think. And it's not always an agreement. And I think that began a relationship, that's 13 years old now. And so, that work and that mutual respect does take time. And I'd say, the hardest part of working with government is, I don't care where your politics are, half the people you're not going to like very much. It's just, that's the nature of who they are. And I guess that's true everywhere. And I think really working those relationships and doing a lot of listening and also sharing what you're doing, you have to do that before you want something. I mean, I guess that's the point. You have to engage people before you're there with an ask, because then you're just like everybody else in government, showing up at the door to knock on to ask for something. And that's hard to make time to do. It really is. But I don't think there's another easier way to do it. I just don't. And I would say changes in leadership are a huge opportunity. So wherever there's a change in an elected official or a seat, those people are anxious to learn. They want help. So if you feel like what you're dealing with now is intractable, there are ways in based on changes in leadership.
I'm going to add one thing before Maria adds something really insightful, I'm sure. So understanding how government works is really important for cross-sector partnerships. And hence why Maria is the Chief Community Impact Officer and replaced really on our team, Clotilde, who came from county government, who was our amazing CEO for so long. You really need to understand the inner workings of how things go in order to speak their language, understand the right timing, et cetera. So it is why we made the decision to bring on Maria when Clotilde was retiring, for just that, that knowledge, having that internally. Maria, say you're awesome.
So true, Betsy. Local government, it's kind of a classic basic civics lesson. Are you talking to the legislative branch, or are you talking to the executive branch, right? And the executive is going to have more authority that is sort of universal, but the legislative branch is going to have more authority that's shared. They're going to be closer to the public. They represent smaller districts, whereas the executive branch is going to represent everybody. So it really requires, just as you would do data about any issue that you are working on, you should do some data about the local government that you're working with. So if you're meeting with the president of your city council, you should know who is in their district. How big is their district? How many people do they represent? What is the demographics of the people that they represent, right? If you're meeting with an executive branch of government, it's useful to know, when are they proposing their budget, right? Some budgets are on a fiscal year, some budgets are on a calendar year. So you need to know, like if you're working on a public policy ask, and I'll just take a commercial break to say public policy can be about two things. It can be about something that is legislative and a very specific policy or regulation, or it could be about an appropriation, a funding request, right? So you have to know your budget cycle if it's going to be an appropriations request. So you need to be prepared for that and understand that data like you would anything else. And the last thing that I'll say is, it does help if you are meeting with somebody in local government that is, that really understands and values a community voice. I mean, the thing about our democracy is that it is constantly turning people over, right? So you might think that you did all the education with somebody and then an election happened and we started with somebody new. So you'll have to take it from the top again because they'll value that community voice, but they'll be brand new and they will need you to revisit it and take it from the top.
I want to thank you all. This is rich with information. I mean, we could spend so much time, and I just sincerely appreciate and thank you all for just kicking us off with the Economic Mobility webinar series. And thank you for the information that you shared. And I'm pretty sure the audience is very thankful and appreciative as well. So we are at time. I'm just going to ask the audience to be on the lookout for more information from CF Leads as it relates to the webinar series. But Buffalo, thank you so much. This was excellent. And I thoroughly enjoyed just sharing community and being in space with you. So thank you
Great
so
to
much.
see you, Leonard. Great to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Likewise.